Have you ever wanted something so much that instead of moving toward it, you started avoiding it? The more it mattered, the more you pushed it away, the closer it felt, the more you found reasons to stop, start over, or run in the opposite direction? I have. And if you have too, you might be surprised at what can live underneath that pattern. Curious? Join me for this episode of the See It Be It podcast. I'm calling it the loneliness of almost. Welcome to the See It Be It podcast with Kirsten McKinnon. It's been a minute since my last episode. I've been trying to make this one for a while, and every version has seemed worse than the first. Not because I didn't have anything to talk about. Talking and ideas have never been an issue for me. But my efforts would inevitably devolve into something that sounded too polished or academic or like something I've already said 100 times before, or just not like the real me. And the irony is that what I wanted to do was create an episode on perfectionism. So, of course, I was trying to make the perfect episode about how perfectionism was stopping me from making the episode. Hilarious. And maybe you know some version of that too. Maybe there's something you keep circling, revising, or almost doing. It's something you want, but the more it matters, the harder it gets to move toward it. That's what I want to explore here today. Because I don't think perfectionism is just about being picky or having high standards. I think it can keep us on the outskirts of the life that we want. Close enough to see it, but just outside our reach. In my years of career coaching, perfectionism has invariably shown up as the classic answer for job interview questions. When they ask, what's your biggest weakness? Well, I can be a bit of a perfectionist, we might say. While this is not an effective interview response, I get why we say it. It can feel like we're saying that our weakness is caring too much or having high standards. It can seem like a safe answer, right? But I don't think perfectionism is safe. I think we have made perfectionism sound harmless when for many of us, it is quietly shaping what we do not allow ourselves to try. Perfectionism is wanting to do something, starting the thing, stopping the thing and starting over. It's almost finishing something, but not quite. It's having the idea, feeling excited about the idea for a minute, and then slowly talking yourself out of it because it's not clear enough, useful enough, original enough, or whatever version of enough your brain decides to use that day. And this has been the loop for me in this episode. I would get an idea, start to shape it, decide it was wrong, start again, and eventually I was doing so much beginning that there was no ending. There was never an actual finished thing. I convinced myself that starting over was still progress, but really, often it wasn't. It was just avoidance in disguise. And, the wild thing is that if I zoom out even just a little, my expectations of myself were kind of ridiculous. I was finishing my first month of my new master's degree. I was also in my first month of fully grieving the loss of my job in higher education after being laid off from the college that I worked for more than 13 years. And somehow, in the middle of all that, I was still treating a month without a podcast episode as evidence that I was failing. That's what perfectionism can do. It can erase context. It can take a very human experience of transition, grief, learning and adjustment and turn it into a character flaw. And your version of this might not be a podcast. It might be a paper, a business idea, a relationship conversation, a creative project, a job application, a move, a decision that you need to make, or that version of yourself that you're almost stepping into. And if you have experienced a version of this, you might be feeling it in your body right now as I'm talking. You might be feeling a tightening or sinking or bracing or anxiousness or heaviness that shows up when you imagine yourself actually doing the thing that you say you want. At first I thought, okay, this is fear of failure, classic perfectionism. If I publish the episode, then people might not like it. If I choose a direction, I might pick the wrong direction. If I make the offer, I might find out that nobody wants it. And if I don't fully try, then I don't fully have to know. There's a kind of safety in that. It's not a good safety, but it's a familiar one. If I never really give the thing a chance, I can keep the fantasy alive that maybe it would have worked if I had given it a chance. So yes, fear of failure is definitely in there. But after journaling and talking it out in therapy, I discovered that a fear of failure wasn't the deepest driver of my behavior. I want to share the thought I found underneath all of this. Not because I think it would be everyone's thought, but maybe hearing mine will help you listen for yours. There was a pervasive thought playing over and over on repeat in my mind. And this thought was, I can't have what I want. I can't have what I want. I don't like the drama of that thought or how it seems more appropriate for a tantruming toddler than a grown adult. I also don't like how it makes my body feel heavy and deflated, even though I know the thought isn't completely true. I have had many things that I've wanted. I have had love and connection. I have created things. I have changed my life in ways that I once believed weren't even possible. So it's not factually true, but emotionally, it has a lot of power. And when I let the thought that I can't have what I want land, instead of immediately trying to judge it or push it away, what came up for me was not just fear. The feelings that washed over me were sadness and loneliness, much more achy than fear. And maybe that's worth considering. What if the emotion under your perfectionism is not the obvious one? What if it isn't only fear? What if there's grief there, or shame, or longing, or loneliness? This changed the way that I understood what was happening. Maybe perfectionism wasn't only protecting me from failure. Maybe it was also protecting me from longing, from the vulnerability of wanting something I can't guarantee I'll ever get. And I know it might sound like a strange connection at first. Like, what does the thought, I can't have what I want, have to do with perfectionism? But for me, the connection is this. If some part of me believes I can't have what I want, then wanting itself starts to feel painful. And perfectionism gives me something to do with that pain. I can keep preparing and polishing and researching, restarting, and trying to become good enough instead of sitting with the ache of wanting something I can't guarantee I'll get. I want this podcast to matter. I want this business to work. I want my creative expression to be enough. I want to be seen and received. I want to have a life that feels true to who I am. And as much as I want these things, there's no way for me to know that they'll ever happen. There is no certainty. That's the part that feels painful for me. The feeling of wanting without a guarantee. After this new revelation, I was doing some research and found a study with a title that stopped me in my tracks. The study was titled, "Perfection is a Sad and Lonely Place." So obviously, I felt seen by the title alone because, yes, that's what this has felt like. Not just stressful, not just writer's block, sad and lonely. And maybe if you've been calling yourself lazy or inconsistent, dramatic, undisciplined, maybe there may be something validating and considering that your stuckness could be carrying sadness too. The article talks about perfectionism and something that's called existential vulnerability, which sounds very academic, but it's really something very human. It points to how we want things we can't control. We want love, belonging, meaning, expression, safety, a life that feels like ours, and we don't get to have certainty first. I think perfectionism is one way I've tried to bargain with that uncertainty. Like if I'm prepared enough, polished enough, useful enough, impressive enough, I won't have to feel so exposed by wanting something. Maybe if the episode is good enough, I won't feel the rawness of hoping that it connects with you. Maybe if the business is clear enough, I won't have to feel the vulnerability of wanting it to work. But of course, there is no perfection. And perfectionism can't protect us from uncertainty, longing, or loneliness. Instead, it often just makes us face those things alone. There was another study I found that helped me understand why the loneliness piece matters so much. It reviewed something called the perfectionism social disconnection model, another academic phrase. But the idea, as I understand it, is that perfectionism isn't only an achievement problem, it's also a connection problem. And this made so much sense to me because perfectionism doesn't just keep me from finishing things, it keeps me managing how I'm seen instead of letting myself be known. It keeps me trying to become acceptable enough to belong, which makes me feel more alone. It's a connection problem, which means that the question is not only how do I get myself to finish the thing? It's also, where am I hiding the parts of me that most need connection? This led me to remember talking to someone years ago about my perfectionism. And this person's view was that perfectionists believe that they are almost perfect. Like the problem is that we think we're so close to perfect that we just have to keep reaching. And I remember being really surprised by this because it was so far from my actual experience. From the inside, it certainly doesn't feel like I'm almost perfect. From the inside, it feels like constant, painful not enoughness. Like being very far away from whatever enough even is. And that conversation was a lonely interaction. To be seen as someone who thought she was close to perfect when my inner experience was almost the opposite. This memory really felt like a lived experience of an example of that social disconnection, being misread by someone in the very moment where you're trying to explain your pain. And I wonder how many people who struggle with perfectionism have experienced some version of this. On the outside, people see control, high standards, ambition. But on the inside, there's fear, shame, and longing. Other people see someone who thinks they're better than everyone else. But inside, there's someone trying desperately to just become enough. That's lonely. I think this can be especially hard when you're a student or an entrepreneur or a creator or anyone who's trying to accomplish something where there's no one standing over you making you do it. When there's an external deadline or a boss or a professor or a client waiting, at least there's some structure. But when you're building your own thing, the only person holding you accountable is you. And that sounds empowering, but it's also really hard if perfectionism has already convinced you that you're not enough, because then the person who's supposed to treat the dream as worthy of follow through is the same person questioning whether they are worthy enough to have the dream in the first place. It is hard to hold yourself accountable to a life that you don't fully believe that you're allowed to have. That's not just a time management issue. Sometimes we do need better structure, and I'm not against that. I appreciate a good structure. But if the deeper belief is, I can't have what I want, then a better planner is only going to get me so far. The stuckness is emotional. It's tied to longing and self-worth and what happens inside us when we start moving toward something we really want. And this is where I want to be careful, because I don't want to make wanting the problem. Wanting is not the problem. The dream is not the problem. The see it part of see it, be it matters. Imagining a life, a body of work, a relationship, a way of being that feels more honest and alive and yours, that matters. The problem is when the dream becomes a courtroom, when the podcast becomes evidence, when the business becomes evidence, when the relationship becomes evidence, evidence that leads to a verdict that I'm either enough or I'm not. And for me, that's where I can lose myself, where authentic expression turns into performance, where I leave the aliveness of wanting and end up in the loneliness of almost. So if you're listening to this and there's something you keep almost doing, maybe this can be an invitation to get curious about what lives underneath your almost. Not in a harsh or judgy kind of way, not in a why am I like this kind of way, just gently. Maybe noticing the repeated thought around your perfectionism can be a doorway to deeper understanding. For me, the thought was I can't have what I want, and the emotions underneath it were sadness and loneliness. Maybe your thought is different. Maybe it's I'm going to fail, or no one will care, or I'm too much, or I'm not enough, or it won't work out for me. And maybe before trying to fix the perfectionism, you could ask, what emotion is this protecting me from feeling? And can I allow myself to feel that even for just a moment? And then maybe the next step is to not become perfect. Maybe it's to let just one real thing exist. One honest statement. One imperfect episode. One real conversation. One small act of expression. One moment of saying, I want this. without immediately punishing yourself for wanting it. Maybe the practice is to let it be a good enough attempt, a good enough version, a good enough offering, not making it careless or meaningless, not, I don't care how this turns out, but just real enough to learn from, honest enough to connect through, alive enough to live into. Maybe instead of asking, was this good enough? What did I learn? Maybe instead of turning every attempt into evidence about whether we are or aren't enough, we can let it be information, practice, contact with reality. And when the self-attack comes in, because for me, it usually does, maybe the recovery sounds something like, I'm learning consistency through practice. I do not have to prove my worth through performance. So maybe this episode is one honest experiment in letting good enough be enough. Not because I don't care, but because I care enough to stop withholding what's real until it becomes perfect. In a way, releasing this episode is me practicing the thing I'm talking about, treating the episode as an experiment in expression, not a final verdict about who I am. So maybe that's what this is, not a perfect explanation of perfectionism or proof that I have something to offer, just an honest experiment. One moment where I'm practicing to stop almost being myself and just be here imperfectly, wanting. Maybe still a little sad and lonely, but not quite as alone. Because I've chosen to share some of me with you. And if this episode brought something up for you, I would genuinely like to hear from you. Part of why I'm sharing this is because I don't want these experiences to stay hidden in private, where they can convince us that we're the only ones that are having them. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at seeitbeit.ca, on YouTube at seeitbeitca, on LinkedIn under Kirsten McKinnon, if that's where you prefer to connect. Leave a comment or a message, just share what this stirred up for you. And if this episode made you think of someone else who may need to hear it, please send it their way. And if you want to keep exploring courageous clarity and embodied experimentation with me, subscribe or follow the podcast wherever you're listening. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next episode.